Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another video. We are picking up where we left off from the last video. This is part 2 of case 18 and this will conclude the case of the murder of 12-year-old Shanda Sharer. If you haven't already watched part 1 of this case, I highly suggest watching it before this video as it contains very important information about the life and personality of Shanda, and I go into great detail of all the events that lead up to the night of her murder. I will go ahead and put up my disclaimer on the screen. As I've mentioned in part 1, this is a very upsetting case. Everyone involved is under the age of 18, and so that's always very upsetting when everyone we talk about is a child. Part 2 is going to be a lot more horrific than part 1. The pure hell that Shanda endured for hours is enough to give any person nightmares. In this video, we will continue to deal with elements such as physical and sexual assault, and I will explain the graphic details of the gruesome death of Shanda Sharer. If this is something you don't want to listen to right now, please take care of yourself, and I do understand if you do need to click out of the video at any point. Hopefully you will be back for a future case, or if you want to check out my playlist and listen to a different case, I will leave a link in the description. But we do have a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and dive into part 2 of the horrendous case of Shanda Sharer. So I will start by giving a brief recap of part 1. That way, if you are unfamiliar with this case, it will make a lot more sense. Shanda Sharer was a bubbly, happy, beautiful 12-year-old girl who had recently moved to New Albany, Indiana with her mother Jackie in order to be closer to her father Stephen and her older half-sister Paige. Shanda started the school year in 1991 at a new school by the name of Hazelwood Middle School, and within just a couple of weeks at being in this new school, she had gotten into a physical fight with another student by the name of Amanda Heverin. What had started as a rocky relationship quickly changed when both girls were sent to detention after the altercation. Shanda and Amanda had developed a romantic and sexual relationship despite Amanda being nearly 3 years older than 12-year-old Shanda Sharer. They spent a lot of time with each other, writing several love notes back and forth to one another, but Amanda was already in another long-term relationship with a 16-year-old girl named Melinda Lovelace, who had grown up in a horrific and abusive household, which stemmed from her prick piece of shit father, Larry Lovelace. Things quickly escalated into a love triangle situation with Amanda playing with both Shanda and Melinda's emotions. Melinda grew extremely jealous of Shanda and blamed her solely for destroying her relationship with Amanda. As months went by, with Melinda watching as Amanda swooned over Shanda, she began having very disturbing and dark thoughts. She openly told friends and anyone who would listen how she wanted to kill Shanda for stealing her girlfriend. As the situation between Shanda, Amanda, and Melinda grew more toxic, Shanda began to fail her classes, and the once happy and athletic girl who had always loved playing sports and other extracurricular activities no longer had any desire to do anything but isolate herself in her room. Once Shanda's mother and father had discovered her sexual relationship with Amanda, they pulled her out of Hazelwood Middle and transferred her to a Catholic school by the name of Our Lady of Perpetual Help School. After being transferred to this new school and losing almost all contact with Amanda, Shanda started to return to her old self and was once again the happy and friendly young girl she had always been. Things were starting to look up for her. She had her whole entire life ahead of her. Her grades had improved significantly, and she had just joined the girls' basketball team. She had made new friends, and she had even started to date a boy that she had met through this new school. She had moved on from the drama that came with Amanda, but Melinda had not given up on this idea to murder Shanda. She began making plans to murder this innocent girl with an outcast named Lori Tackett, who was known for her obsession with the occult and her claims that she had hellish entities that would possess her. Melinda and Lori individually had a lust for blood. Melinda wanted to murder Shanda, and Lori had always wanted to know what it felt like to murder someone. Both of these girls coming together would seal Shanda's fate. Melinda and Lori talked about killing Shanda for weeks, and eventually they came up with a plan to go out to a local concert. But before going to this concert, they would show up to Shanda's home and would trick her into getting into the car, where they would then beat and then kill her. Lori would also recruit and include 2 other 15-year-old girls on this concert trip named Hope Rippey and Toni Lawrence for their plan. Now we have 4 teenage girls who each grew up in difficult and unfortunate circumstances, all of them who, at the end of the day, had such little regard for human life. All 4 of them, Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Toni, would contribute to ending the life of Shanda Sharer. On January 10th, 1992, Lori picked up Hope and Tony at their high school located in Madison, Indiana. Lori had already told Hope about the plan that Melinda and her had come up with to kill Shanda Scherer that night in a previous conversation just days before. Tony was the only one who had no idea about this plan at this time. Tony was under the impression that she was just invited to another night out with some friends, with the promise of some alcohol and to potentially meet boys at this concert. Once Lori had picked up Hope and Tony, the three of them headed to New Albany, Indiana to pick up Melinda. On the way to New Albany, the girls stopped at a gas station for some cigarettes and road trip snacks. After getting these snacks is around the time where Lori decided to let Tony in on the plan they had for Shanda that night. Tony had known Lori for years, just like Hope, and knew that Lori loved making up disturbing stories and fantasies. And even though Lori was telling her how they were going to get a little girl named Shanda and kill her that night, Tony just rolled her eyes, ignored Lori's claims, and all three continued their drive to New Albany. When they arrived at Melinda's home, they all went upstairs to her bedroom to get ready for this concert. Hope and Tony had never met Melinda prior to this, which, by the way, is another element to this case I completely don't understand. The girls got dressed and borrowed some of Melinda's clothes for their night out, and things seemed pretty normal up until Melinda casually went downstairs and she came back with this large kitchen knife and told Lori, Hope, and Tony that this was the knife she was going to use to scare Shanda. She began to tell these other girls how much she hated Shanda for stealing Amanda from her. Lori, of course, had already heard all of this before. But again, this was the first time Melinda, Hope, and Tony had met. And so she was explaining to them how pretty Shanda was and how she needed to be taught a lesson for what she did. But one of the craziest things about this case is that Lori, Hope, and Tony don't even know who Shanda is. They had never met her. They didn't know anything about her. The only person from this group of misfits who even knew Shanda's existence was Melinda. If any of the other girls were concerned about Melinda openly saying how at the very least she was going to threaten Shanda with this kitchen knife, none of them cared enough to say anything because all four of them piled into Lori's car and they started driving to Jeffersonville, Indiana, where Shanda's father Stephen lived and where Melinda knew Shanda stayed at on the weekends. They made it to Stephen Scherer's house after stopping at a local McDonald's for directions. Shanda was in the middle of getting ready to go to a friend's birthday party that was just down the street when two girls knocked on the front door. Melinda's plan was a simple one. She instructed Hope and Tony to get out of the car and get Shanda to come into the car by claiming they were friends with Amanda. She instructed them to tell Shanda that Amanda needed to talk to her and that they were there to take Shanda to see Amanda. So Melinda hid in the back seat of the car, covered herself with a blanket. Hope and Tony did what they were told, while Lori also stayed in the car and waited. But this plan didn't exactly work out too well. Hope and Tony knocked on the door, and when Shanda opened the door and saw these two teenagers that she had never met, and the first thing Hope asks is, "Can we speak to Shanda?" Shanda, who was confused like any person would be, was like, "Yeah, you're speaking to Shanda, that's me." Hope then introduced herself, said her name was Hope, and that she was a friend of Amanda's, just like Melinda had told her to do. But interestingly enough, when Tony introduced herself to Shanda, she said her name was Stacy, but that she was also friends with Amanda. The girls told Shanda that Amanda wanted to speak with her and asked Shanda to go with them so they can drive her to go see Amanda. But Shanda was reluctant. She told Hope and Tony that she couldn't go as she was about to leave to go to this party and that she wasn't going to be able to see Amanda that night. Hope then improvised and told Shanda that Amanda had something really important that she needed to tell her. And Shanda instantly became interested and curious as to what Amanda needed to tell her that was so important. So Shanda told Hope and Tony to come back to her house around midnight with Amanda and that they would be able to talk then. Hope and Tony agreed to this and walked back to Lori's car, and the second Melinda realized that they had failed to bring Shanda with them, she got extremely pissed and upset that she wasn't able to get her revenge on Shanda. But Hope and Tony got her to calm down by explaining to her that they were going to come back at around midnight and that Shanda agreed to come out at that time, and they told Melinda not to worry about it. This was just a slight delay and that they would be back to get Shanda. Now that they had a few hours to kill before they needed to come back, they decided to go to the concert. Shanda went to her friend's birthday party as planned, and Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Tony went to a punk rock concert showing of the band Sunspring just over the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky. At this concert, Melinda and Lori were having a great time. They were enjoying the music and dancing in the crowd, but Hope and Tony quickly grew bored, complained it was too hot inside this concert area and the music was too loud. So they asked Lori to give them the keys to her car, and both of them went outside and sat in the car in the parking lot. At some point, while Hope and Tony were waiting for Lori and Melinda to come out of this concert, two random teenage boys approached the girls and asked if they could hang out with them for a while. And the girls did agree to hang out with them. Now, some sources say that Hope and Tony had engaged in sexual activity with these two boys. Some sources say they don't, and they just had talked to them for a while. Honestly, who knows what the truth is? And to be honest, it's pretty irrelevant to me whether they did or did not have sex with these strangers. The only relevancy about this encounter is that Tony had told these boys about their plans after this concert. Tony had opened her big mouth to these boys about the plan to kill Shanda Scherer. And in my opinion, the four of these people had treated the whole situation as a big joke. These boys didn't believe Tony and were shrugging off what she was telling them until Hope decided to pull out the kitchen knife Melinda had been carrying around and showed them this knife. Then the demeanor of these boys changed. They became rightfully concerned, and they told Hope and Tony to not go with Melinda and Lori. They even offered to give them a ride home or to drop them off wherever they wanted. But Hope immediately declined the offer. She didn't want to let Lori down for whatever reason, and she made the excuse how if they left with the boys, then Melinda and Lori would be stuck, since she has the car keys. Just a lot of dumb excuses, if you ask me. Tony was, however, tempted to go with these boys, but ultimately, she turned down the offer as well, mostly, according to her, due to not wanting to leave Hope alone with Melinda and Lori. And I say this all the time, hindsight is 20/20. Both of them could have gone with these total strangers, made it back home safe, and avoided all the events that would unfold on this night. But Tony and Hope didn't go with them. They waited for Melinda and Lori in that parking lot. And this would not be the last time Hope and Tony would have the opportunity to leave the situation or to save Shanda Scherer's life. Shanda returned home from her friend's birthday party sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. Her father, Stephen, before going to bed for the night, told Shanda she should go to sleep soon. Shanda, who was watching TV, told him she would be going to bed soon and told her dad goodnight and that she loved him. He returned the sentiment and went to bed, completely oblivious that this would be the last time he would ever see his daughter alive. Meanwhile, the four teens left the concert and made it back to Stephen Scherer's house at about 12:30 a.m. As they were driving back to get Shanda, Melinda was openly telling the rest of the passengers how excited she was to kill Shanda. And once again, no one attempted to even acknowledge how inhumane, wrong, and to top it all off, how stupid of an idea and plan this was. Now that they were back at Shanda's father's house, Melinda again instructs Hope and Tony to go to the door to get Shanda to come out and into the car so they can take her. But this time, Tony refused to go to the door, and instead, this time Hope and Lori went up to the front door. Melinda crouched down in the back seat, holding the kitchen knife, and covered herself with a blanket again. Hope and Lori knocked on the door. Shanda answered just as she said she would, and they lured her outside, telling her that they are going to bring her to see Amanda as promised. Shanda proceeds to follow these two girls outside. She doesn't take her purse or anything with her. I don't believe she expected that she was actually going to go anywhere. They get to Lori's car, and Shanda asks them where Amanda is, and they tell her that they are going to drive her to see Amanda at the Witch's Castle. The Witch's Castle is a well-known teenage hangout. It's an abandoned, ruined-looking building. It has urban legends and myths that a lot of kids use to hang out, party and smoke and everything like that. So we have Hope now driving Lori's car. Tony is in the passenger seat. Shanda is in the middle between Hope and Tony. And Lori is in the back seat with Melinda, who is still crouching and hiding under the blanket. They started driving towards the Witch's Castle, and almost immediately, Lori starts to question Shanda about her relationship with Amanda. She asked her personal things, like if they were still talking or hanging out together, and she asked if her and Amanda had ever had sex. Shanda answered her questions with honesty. She explained that they weren't as close anymore, but that she still really cared for Amanda. And she admitted to the girls that her and Amanda had been intimate together. Then, all of a sudden, while Shanda was still answering questions, Melinda pops out from the back seat, grabs Shanda by the hair, and presses the kitchen knife to her throat. And I truly believe Lori was asking these types of questions on purpose. She knew that this was going to piss and set Melinda off, and I think she wanted and encouraged a lot of the things that happened to Shanda. Also, just a heads up, from this point onward, everything I'm going to describe is absolutely horrendous and extremely upsetting. If you want or need to skip ahead so you don't have to hear the graphic details, here's a timestamp to skip ahead to where they find Shanda's body and start the investigation of her case. But let's continue. Melinda is pressing the knife to Shanda's throat, and of course this poor, defenseless girl is crying and begging Melinda not to hurt her and to just let her go. But Melinda didn't care about her cries. She continued to hold Shanda's hair and press the knife against her throat, while frequently calling her a bitch as they continued to drive to the witch's castle. Once they arrived, Melinda and Lori pulled Shanda out of the car, who was hysterical and absolutely terrified. Hope and Tony led the way as Melinda and Lori forced Shanda to walk up the hill to get inside the witch's castle. Once inside the ruins, they tied Shanda's hands together as she continued to beg and plead for them to stop and to let her go. Shanda was willing to promise and say anything to these girls if it meant that she would be set free. But her pleas accomplished nothing. None of those girls cared or had any empathy for this 12-year-old little girl. Once she was tied up, Hope taunted Shanda with the knife as Melinda began to take Shanda's jewelry off one by one, teasing and laughing at her the more she became upset. She threatened to cut off Shanda's hair so she wouldn't be pretty anymore. And at one point, Melinda takes off Shanda's Mickey Mouse watch and presses the side button, which would play a happy tune when it was pressed, and she danced along with this tune. Then told Shanda that this was now her watch and strapped it on her own wrist. It's stereotypical mean girl behavior at its finest. Lori then grabbed a black shirt that had been in her car and lit this shirt on fire. As this fire grew, these girls were continuing to tease Shanda however they could. Suddenly, Lori pointed at the fire, looked directly at Shanda, and told her that she was going to look like the burnt shirt by the end of the night. After a few minutes with this fire going on, Lori then became paranoid and realized that cars are driving by, and she became concerned that these cars were going to see this fire and call the cops to report it. She expressed her concerns to Melinda, Hope, and Tony, so they all quickly decided to grab Shanda, throw her back into the car, and haul ass out of there. They then went to a 5-star gas station. Lori went inside to ask for directions and to pay for gas. Hope was the one to pump gas into the car, while Shanda was stuffed in the back seat with a blanket covering her, as Melinda stood guard to make sure she didn't try to escape or yell for help. Tony decided that it would be a great idea to call a friend of hers at the gas station's payphone. During this phone call, Tony didn't alert the person on the other line about what was currently happening to Shanda. She didn't express to this person that anything was wrong or that a 12-year-old girl was currently being held captive and tormented. Nope, it was just a casual conversation about nothing. It's beyond infuriating how many times Shanda's life could have been saved. Tony was away from the others. If she was scared of them, as she later claims to have been, why didn't she take the chance and call the police to alert someone about what was happening to Shanda? If she had alerted someone at this point, then all the pain and suffering Shanda endured wouldn't have happened, and she would still be alive and well today. After Tony got off the phone, they all left the gas station and drove about an hour to Madison, Indiana, near where Lori lived. They ended up on a desolate road where they pulled over and forced Shanda out of the car again. Melinda untied Shanda's hands and ordered her to remove her clothes. And remember, it's the beginning of January in Indiana. It's the middle of the night. It's freezing outside. It was so cold, in fact, that while Shanda was undressing herself, Hope and Tony went back into the car in an attempt to keep warm and watched Shanda undress herself from inside the car. Shanda stripped down until she was only in her underwear, while Melinda was threatening her with a knife the entire time. Once her clothes were on the ground, Melinda scooped them up, threw them in the back of the car, and told the other girls she wanted to keep Shanda's clothes as souvenirs. Hope grabbed Shanda's bra from the clutter of clothes and proceeded to put Shanda's bra on over her own bra. Why Hope even did this to begin with, who knows? Lori then grabbed Shanda's arms and held them behind her back while Melinda punched and beat Shanda. And she didn't just hit her once, you guys. She beat this 12-year-old who was almost fully naked with her bare fist as Shanda begged for her life. She swore to Melinda that she would stay away and never talk to Amanda ever again. She just wanted Melinda to stop hurting her. There was no stopping Melinda. She finally got to release all the anger she's been holding inside about Shanda. She punched her face and her stomach as hard as she could until Shanda was on the ground. Melinda pulled Shanda up by her hair and slammed Shanda's face against her knee multiple times. What made that even worse was that Shanda had just gotten braces on her teeth just about a month prior. So when Melinda's slamming Shanda's face on her knee, the braces were cutting her lips more and more after each blow. Her mouth was bleeding profusely from this. Shanda eventually fell to the ground from this attack, and Melinda grabbed the knife and attempted to slit Shanda's throat, but the knife was too dull for it to even make a serious cut. Hope then decides to get out of the car and helps Lori hold Shanda down on the ground as Melinda attempts to use her foot to press the knife into Shanda's throat. But still, this knife couldn't make a cut. After this failed attempt to slit Shanda's throat, Hope returned back to the car with Tony, while Melinda and Lori took turns just stabbing Shanda with the knife. They stabbed the back of her neck, her stomach, her arms and legs, anywhere they were able to make puncture wounds with this dull knife. So Lori, who is now frustrated at the fact that Shanda is still alive, goes to the car and gets this rope that she had brought with them. She wrapped it around Shanda's neck. Lori held one end, Melinda held the other, and the both of them pulled on this rope, strangling Shanda. They kept pulling until Shanda lost consciousness and went limp. While Shanda was screaming and begging for her life as this rope was strangling her, Hope and Tony were still in the car, and the only move they made was to turn up the volume on the radio so they could drown out Shanda's screams. As far as we know, Hope and Tony made zero effort to help Shanda while this attack was occurring. When Shanda lost consciousness from being strangled by the rope, Lori and Melinda believed they had killed her, and Lori picked up Shanda's limp body and threw her in the trunk of the car. They immediately drove to Lori's house, which was just a couple of miles away, left the unconscious Shanda in the trunk of the car, and the four teenagers crept into the house and into Lori's bedroom. Melinda and Lori, whose hands were covered in Shanda's blood, washed up in the bathroom sink. Then Lori's demented ass brought out her rune stones and told the other three girls that everything was going to be okay. She used these stones to read each of their fortunes and enthusiastically said that all of their futures were looking bright and they had nothing to worry about. And if there's anything to conclude from this, is that Lori sucks at reading fortunes, and she is clearly psychotic. Then all of a sudden, while Lori was still playing around with these stones, a dog starts barking from outside. All four girls instantly stopped whatever they were doing and began to listen outside the window. And as they were listening, they were able to hear the muffled screams of Shanda Scherer coming from inside the trunk of Lori's car. Lori told the other three girls that she was going to take care of Shanda. She ran downstairs, grabbed a paring knife, walked outside, opened her trunk, and stabbed Shanda multiple times with this knife in an attempt to kill and silence her. After she was done stabbing Shanda, she returned to the bedroom covered in Shanda's blood and went back into the bathroom to clean the blood off her hands again. When she was all clean, she announced to the group that they all needed to go on a joyride to figure out what to do with Shanda's body. Hope and Tony immediately refused and flat out told Lori and Melinda that they weren't going on this drive. They no longer wanted to be a part of anything else that was going to happen to Shanda and refused to leave the bedroom. So while Melinda and Lori got back into the car and drove away with Shanda still in the trunk, Hope and Tony stayed in Lori's room. And guess what they did as soon as Lori and Melinda left? If your answer is they alerted someone about what had happened and what was currently happening to Shanda, you would be dead wrong. Somehow, after everything they had witnessed and had done to Shanda themselves, Hope and Tony laid down on Lori's bed and they went to sleep. The fact that they were able to go to sleep at all says a lot, in my opinion. Another opportunity to save Shanda was presenting itself on a silver platter, and neither of them did anything. Shanda's pain and torture is far from over. She was still alive and would endure what I can only describe as hell for the next several hours at the hands of Melinda and Lori. It's around 2:30 in the morning when Melinda and Lori leave Hope and Tony at Lori's house. Lori is the driver, Melinda is in the passenger seat, and Shanda, who is suffering from several injuries, remains in the trunk. Lori lets Melinda know that they will find an isolated location to just dump and leave Shanda's body. Melinda asked Lori if she was sure that Shanda was dead, and Lori told her that she didn't know, and then casually tells Melinda that they should burn her, and Melinda agrees to this plan. After driving around for a few minutes, suddenly Shanda comes back into consciousness, and now Lori and Melinda can hear her crying and making gurgling sounds from within the trunk. They listen to Shanda make these sounds for a while until Lori decides to pull over. Melinda and Lori both get out of the car, and Lori makes sure she grabs a tire iron that she kept under the seat of her car. They open the trunk of the car, and Shanda miraculously, despite being beaten, stabbed, and strangled with a rope, sits up. She's covered in blood. Her eyes are rolled in the back of her head. She tries to speak, but it only comes out as gurgling noises. Shanda does manage to say one final word, "Mommy." And then Lori hits her over the head with the tire iron as hard as she could, then slams the trunk shut. Knowing "Mommy" is her last known word is indescribable. As a proud mommy's girl myself, it absolutely breaks my heart. Melinda and Lori then get back into the car, and they continue their joyride through the countryside as if this was just another normal day. Now both girls are starting to get panicked and frustrated because Shanda would not die, and they kept discussing what they should do with her body. There were conversations about maybe they should take her body out of the trunk, place it on the road, and run it over with the car. They also talked about throwing her into a river. But every so often, they would again hear the gurgling sounds from inside the trunk, and this became the routine for the next 6 or 7 hours. Once they heard Shanda make a sound, Lori would pull the car over, and one of the two girls would take the tire iron, open the trunk, and would beat Shanda over the head, close the trunk, and then they would drive on. Each time the tire iron became more and more soaked with Shanda's blood, and at one point, Melinda claims that during one of these stops, after Lori had beat Shanda over the head with this tire iron, she came back to the car with a smile and excitedly presented Melinda with this bloody tire iron and told her to smell it. Then she went on to brag how cool it was hitting Shanda over the head with this weapon, as she could feel how her skull was caving in. At some point during the night, the tire iron wasn't just used to beat Shanda over the head. It was also used to sexually assault Shanda. We don't know if it was Lori or Melinda or both of them that did this, as neither one ever confessed to the sexual assault. But we do know that Shanda had severe internal damage from the sexual assault with this object, and again, this went on for hours. She was just a 12-year-old little girl. She did absolutely nothing wrong. I can't fathom the pain or the fear she must have felt throughout these final hours of her life. Just as the sun started to rise on the morning of January 11th, 1992, Lori and Melinda made it back to Lori's house. Hope and Tony were asleep when the other two girls walked in and were once again both covered in blood. As Lori and Melinda cleaned the blood off of themselves again, they told Hope and Tony about how they beat Shanda several times with the tire iron, and both Hope and Tony recall how Melinda and Lori were both laughing and smiling as they told them this. They were proud of what they had done to Shanda. Lori's mother wakes up to all the laughter she's hearing, and she berates her daughter for being out so late, for bringing 3 girls to the house, and for making all this noise so early in the morning. Despite her being initially angry with Lori, she does offer to cook the girls breakfast, but Lori declines this offer and tells her she's going to take the girls home. All 4 pile back into Lori's car and head to a local burn pile that's located just a couple of miles away from Lori's house. They pull over and Lori asks Hope and Tony if they want to take a look at Shanda's body, and she opens the trunk. Tony refuses to look at Shanda, but Hope did look at her, and she would later testify in court how there wasn't an inch of Shanda's body that wasn't covered in blood. While looking at Shanda's body, Hope notices a bottle of Windex cleaner that was laying next to Shanda in the trunk of the car, and she picks up this bottle and sprays Shanda's wounds with this window cleaner, as she taunts Shanda by saying, quote, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" End quote. After Hope is done spraying this cleaner on Shanda, the girls hop back into the car and begin driving down the road and discuss what they are going to do with her body. They all come to the conclusion that the best way to get rid of Shanda is to burn her body and leave her on one of the more isolated roads. Lori pulls into a busy gas station, and they purchase gas to fill up the gas tank, and they also purchase a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. After filling up the car with gasoline, Lori poured the Pepsi out of the bottle and filled it all the way to the top with gasoline. They all left the gas station and drove on side roads until they made it to Lemon Road off US Route 421. Hope was familiar with this area and told the others that this would be a good place to leave Shanda's body. Melinda, Lori, and Hope got out of the car while Tony once again refused to be a part of what was going on and remained in the vehicle. She apparently would rather sit there and continue to not do anything and let chaos to continue to occur, which, in my opinion, is almost just as bad as committing the act itself. But hey, what do I know? Anyway, Melinda, Hope, and Lori cover Shanda in the blanket that they had used the entire night, wrapped her in it, and lifted her out of the trunk of the car. They carried her in the blanket several feet away from the car and dropped her on the dirt road. Lori offered the 2-liter bottle filled with gasoline to Melinda and Hope. Both of them declined to take the bottle, which irritated Lori, so she shoved this bottle into Hope's hands and yelled at her to pour the gasoline onto Shanda. And like the obedient little lapdog that Hope is, she pours about half of the 2 liters of gasoline all over Shanda, who was still clinging to life. Once Shanda was doused with gasoline, Lori lit a match and threw it on top of her. Once her body was ignited, they all hopped back into the car and started to drive down the road. But as they were driving away, Melinda was looking back, watching Shanda's burning body, and announced that she still didn't believe Shanda was dead and that the fire wasn't as powerful as she expected it to be. She expected the fire to be huge, like in the movies, and when she saw the reality of it, because, newsflash, lighting a real human body on fire isn't going to be this gigantic, raging hellfire. It's actually very difficult to set a human body on fire, even with gasoline. Melinda then instructs Lori to turn back around as she feared that Shanda was still alive, and she did not want to leave until she was sure that Shanda was dead. Melinda gets back out of the car, carries the remaining bottle of gasoline, and pours the rest of the liquid onto the still alive, burning body of Shanda. She waits for the fire to pick back up, and she gets back into the car laughing and bragging to the other 3 girls how they should have seen what had just happened, and she declared that Shanda's body was still moving. She had crawled into a fetal position, and her tongue was darting in and out of her mouth, and that she thought this visual was hilarious. She was also clear to let everyone in the car know how glad and happy she was to have gotten rid of Shanda, and that she was finally out of hers and Amanda's lives forever. Then, after bragging and laughing about murdering an innocent 12-year-old girl, they went to McDonald's to eat breakfast. As Lori and Melinda ate their sausages, they joked about how Shanda's burnt body resembled the sausages that they were eating several times. At some point while they were eating their breakfast, Tony excused herself from the table they were all eating at, and she called a friend of hers and confessed to this friend all of the events that occurred the night before. Now she decides to tell someone about Shanda. She could have done this at a more helpful time maybe. I don't know, maybe when Shanda was still alive and had a chance to be saved from her murder. But again, what the hell do I know? After eating breakfast, all 4 girls promised to keep their mouths shut about the murder, which this promise lasted all of about 19 minutes. Lori and Melinda dropped Hope and Tony off at their respective homes, and Lori and Melinda returned to Lori's home, where they attempted to clean out the blood that was on and inside of Lori's car with a hose. As they were trying to clean this blood out of the trunk, Lori found a piece of Shanda's skull, and she laughed while showing this to Melinda, as if the memory of bashing Shanda's head with a tire iron gave her happiness. She then dropped this piece of skull on the driveway, shrugged her shoulders, and said that a dog will just come by and eat it. They took Shanda's clothes that were still in the back seat of the car and burned them on the burn pile. It overall was a very half-assed cleanup job. The police will of course later take Lori's car in for evidence, and when they opened the trunk, it was still filled with blood. Meanwhile, Stephen Scherer was freaking out because he had woken up to find that his 12-year-old daughter was not sound asleep in her bed. Both he and Shanda's stepmother frantically looked everywhere for her. As soon as they realized she wasn't anywhere in the house, they called all of Shanda's known friends, her boyfriend, neighbors. They even contacted Amanda and asked if Shanda was with any of them. And of course, they all stated that she wasn't with them. Stephen called Jackie, Shanda's mother, as a last resort and prayed that his daughter was safely with her. Jackie told Stephen that Shanda wasn't with her, and she rushed to Stephen's home upon hearing that her daughter was missing. Once at Stephen's home, they called the Clark County Police Department and reported 12-year-old Shanda Scherer missing. At approximately 10:45 a.m. on the morning of January 11th, 1992, 2 brothers were on their way to go bird hunting, something that they did together quite frequently. These 2 brothers would get to the hunting ground by taking the back roads and would always use Lemon Road to get to their hunting ground. As they were driving along Lemon Road, they spotted what they initially thought was a mannequin on the side of the road. Their first thoughts were that a couple of teenagers had been messing around and had decided to burn the mannequin for fun. But still, the brothers were curious enough to pull over and approach the scene. Once they got close enough, they immediately realized that it wasn't a burnt mannequin, it was a burnt corpse. And they called the police at 10:55 a.m. to report the finding of this body. The state troopers and investigators collected forensic evidence from the scene, and they initially believed that Shanda's burnt body was a female who was much older than Shanda. At first glance, they thought the body belonged to a girl in her late teens to early 20s. Shanda was beyond any recognition. The investigators that saw her body were met with a horrific sight that they would never be able to forget. Her charred body was in the pugilistic stance, which is characterized by the knees and elbows being flexed with arms raised in the air and fists clenched. It's a very common defensive position typically seen with extremely burned victims. With Shanda being in this stance, it is the first piece of evidence that she was still alive when she was set on fire. Now, of course, the investigators are treating this case very early on as having foul play involved. It was hardly even a question upon seeing her body that this was a homicide, but initially they thought that this young woman had been a victim of some sort of drug deal gone wrong, or had been kidnapped by a male predator. The concept that this murder could have and was committed by 4 teenage girls was something that investigators would have never been able to guess. A radio message was sent to the surrounding areas to keep an eye out for a missing persons report for a young woman in her late teens to early 20s. By about 1 p.m., the crime scene had been recorded by video camera and with several photographs. Castings of the tire tracks and footprints had been made as well. In the weeds nearby, they found the partially burnt and melted 2-liter bottle that contained the gasoline. The investigators were advised of recent missing persons reports in the surrounding areas, but none of these reports fit the profile of the charred body that was in front of them. By this point, Shanda's parents had indeed already filed the missing persons report for their daughter. But because her report had her real age of 12, her report was not one of the reports that were given to the investigators at the scene. After several hours of collecting any evidence and clues from the crime scene, Shanda's body was taken to the morgue just as the sun was beginning to set. Now, what were Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Tony doing throughout this entire day? Well, Hope was at her home, filled with anxiety for a while. She called Lori at least once to express her concerns about everything that had happened, which Lori had to tell her to get a grip and to just calm down. And don't get this confused. She wasn't freaking out because she felt guilty about what she had participated in. She was overwhelmed with the anxiety about getting caught, in my opinion. Tony, who was also filled with the same anxiety, went to her shift at her job and also couldn't stop thinking about the events that had occurred the previous night. As her shift continued, she was looking more and more sick to the point that her manager told her she didn't look well at all and that she needed to go home when she had only been there for a couple of hours. Tony had called Hope once she left her job, and Hope ended up picking up Tony. The two shared their concerns with each other and went to the local bowling alley. At the bowling alley, they immediately saw 2 friends from school, and while they began to talk to these friends, they confessed Shanda's murder to them. These friends were horrified at Hope and Tony's confession and told them that they needed to go to the police and report it. Hope and Tony agreed that this would be the right thing to do, left the bowling alley, but they did not go straight to the police. They told their parents and confessed to them everything they had done and knew about Shanda's murder. Then we have Tweedledum and Tweedledummer, aka Melinda and Lori, who after a shitty cleanup job of Lori's car, sat down and watched some good old-fashioned TV. That's when Melinda began making a couple of phone calls. The first call she made was to a longtime friend named Crystal, and she confesses to her that Shanda is dead and begs Crystal to come over as she needed moral support. After talking to Crystal, Melinda attempts to call Amanda to presumably also tell her about Shanda's murder, but Amanda's father picks up the phone instead and told Melinda she was at the mall and wasn't home yet. Crystal gets to the house where Melinda and Lori confess to everything. According to Crystal, Melinda was seemingly upset with retelling what had happened. But Lori, while going through the entire story of what happened to Shanda and what they had done to her, was smiling and laughing as she described the events. Melinda then attempts to try to reach out to Amanda again. This time she actually calls the mall and has them page Amanda that she has a phone call. Once Amanda picks up the phone, Melinda tells Amanda that something terrible has happened and that she would be on her way to pick her up as soon as possible. Amanda's rightfully like, what the hell is going on? which Melinda tells her that she will explain everything once they come and pick her up. Amanda agrees to be picked up, and Melinda, Lori, and Crystal get back into Lori's car. Yes, the same car that was used to hold Shanda prisoner just hours earlier, and they go and pick up Amanda. Amanda gets into the car, and within seconds of being in this car, Melinda tells Amanda that Shanda is dead, and they drive back to Melinda's house. According to Amanda, Melinda took her alone up to her room, where Melinda confessed to Amanda her version of events as to what happened to Shanda. Melinda told Amanda that she was just going to teach Shanda a lesson and beat her up, but things had gotten out of control, and Lori specifically went crazy and killed Shanda. At first, Amanda thought this was all just some sort of sick joke. She didn't believe Melinda's story. She didn't believe Shanda was even dead. When Melinda and Amanda came back downstairs, Lori wasted no time and offered to show Amanda and Crystal the trunk of her car to prove to them that her and Melinda had murdered Shanda. They all went outside, and Lori opened the trunk, which was still full of bloody stains and handprints. This was when Amanda officially had the realization that Lori and Melinda were telling the truth about what happened to Shanda. Amanda, like a normal person, felt sick and disgusted. Then she immediately asked to be taken back home. They dropped Amanda off at her home, and Melinda made sure before Amanda was able to get out of the car to make her promise that she wouldn't say anything to anyone about the murder. Amanda agreed to not say anything, and she kept this promise. Amanda, who claimed to have loved Shanda so much, but yet didn't have the balls to report her murder to the police, or to anyone for that matter. The three girls remaining in the car, Melinda, Lori, and Crystal, then made a taco run, ate some Taco Bell, then returned to Melinda's house again. Lori had actually invited herself to spend the night at Melinda's house that night, which Melinda clearly didn't want after spending 2 full days with Lori, so she begged Crystal to stay the night as well. But Crystal decided that it would be smarter to leave and not spend the night with 2 psychopaths who just murdered an innocent child the night before in cold blood. And she left after promising both Melinda and Lori that she would not tell anyone about Shanda's murder. Now going back to Hope and Tony. Hope and Tony first told Hope's parents about the murder, and then they all went to Tony's house to tell Tony's parents that they had been a part of a murder. Tony's parents immediately wanted to go to the police to report this. They told Hope's parents that they were going to take Tony into the police station so she can report everything that she knew. And they asked Hope and her family to accompany them to the station as well. But Hope's parents refused to go, and they said they wanted to speak to a lawyer first before they had their 15-year-old daughter incriminate herself. Tony, along with her parents, arrived at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office at around 9 p.m. on January 11th, 1992. She stated that she had information about a murder and explained the events from the night before to detectives. Tony named everyone by name who was involved. She said that the girl's name who they had murdered was Shanda. She didn't know her last name, but said she was from Clark County. The sheriff called the Clark County Police Station and asked if there was anyone reported missing with the first name Shanda. Within minutes, they pulled up the missing persons report of Shanda Scherer. The address Tony had provided when they asked where the girls picked up Shanda matched the address on file for the missing persons report. And everyone's heart just sank upon the realization that this 12-year-old little girl was more than likely gone. As they read the case file, the description of Shanda matched that of the burnt body. Shanda was described as blonde, 5 feet tall, and weighed approximately 100 pounds, as did the body. They haven't, of course, confirmed through DNA evidence yet that this body did belong to Shanda. But with this information coming to light, it was hard to keep denying the facts that were right in front of them. With Tony giving up the names of everyone involved, police were sent to Lori's home first, and when they asked for Lori, her parents told them that she was spending the night at a friend's house with a girl by the name of Melinda. A couple of hours after Tony had arrived at the sheriff's office, Hope finally came in with her parents, and she started her interview with the detectives. The officers made their way to Melinda's house in New Albany and waited for arrest warrants to be filed for both Melinda and Lori. They literally were parked on the street and were watching the house. They knew the girls had to be there since Lori's car was sitting in the driveway, and they were instructed to make sure that the girls didn't try to leave before they could get their ducks in a row and get the arrest warrants and search warrants for Lori's car. As the police waited for these warrants to come in, a detective by the name of Howard Henry was sent to the home of Stephen Scherer. Detective Howard had the unfortunate duty to inform Shanda's parents, Stephen and Jackie, that their 12-year-old beautiful daughter was gone forever. The news broke them. When they first saw Detective Howard at the door, they were hopeful and thought that they had found Shanda safe and sound and that they were going to be reunited. But instead, they were told that the body of their daughter was found in a field, burned beyond recognition, and that they needed Shanda's dental records to confirm the identity of the body. I can't even imagine what it felt like for them to hear this news about their own daughter. At 2 a.m. on the morning of January 12th, the warrants finally came in, and the officers that had been waiting by Melinda's house knocked on the front door and advised Melinda's mother that they had arrest warrants for both Melinda and Lori, and asked her where the girls were at. Melinda's mother, Marjorie, told the officers that they were upstairs in her room. Both girls were fast asleep when the officers opened the door. They woke them up and informed them that they were under arrest for murder. As they were taken into custody, Lori never swayed from the I don't care persona. But Melinda would change. She would burst into tears out of nowhere, or she would just stare blankly ahead of her. These girls were not smart. Even if Toni had not been forced by her parents to go to the police station, between the four of them, they had already told at least 5 or 6 different people to what they had done to Shanda. One of these people would have eventually gone to the police. It was only a matter of time. A few hours after the arrest of both Melinda and Lori, Shanda's body was sent to the office of Dr. George Nichols, who specialized in burnt victims and had performed Shanda's autopsy. Since Shanda had just gone to the dentist about a month prior and had gotten braces, it took almost no time at all to confirm her body as a match through her dental records. The autopsy procedure would confirm all the injuries Shanda had endured. She had suffered multiple injuries. Ligature marks were on her wrists and ankles. She had multiple lacerations to her head, neck, and legs. The upper portion of her body was covered in 3rd and 4th degree burns. The autopsy also revealed that Shanda had been sodomized with a blunt cylindrical object that had been inserted 3.5 inches inside of her. This blunt object was of course the tire iron that was used to beat her over the head the entire night. Due to the discovery that Shanda had suffered from internal bleeding from the sexual assault, it was concluded that the assault occurred while Shanda was still alive. The inside of Shanda's throat was covered in soot, and the soot was also found in her lungs, proving without a doubt that Shanda had still been alive when she was set on fire. Dr. George Nichols, along with several other experts who have reviewed Shanda's autopsy results over the years, all agree that despite all of Shanda's horrendous injuries, if she had gotten medical attention before being set on fire, she would have had a very high chance of surviving. Her official cause of death was smoke inhalation and severe burns. Because of the horrific state of Shanda's body, it was impossible to dress her for the funeral, and this is just so heartbreaking. Instead of dressing her, her parents placed her favorite pair of blue jeans and sweatshirt next to her body in the casket and covered her body with a blanket of roses, and that's how they had to bury their baby girl. Shanda was buried in the town of Big Springs, Kentucky, next to her grandmother. And if Shanda's family had miraculously felt a moment of peace knowing their daughter is finally laid to rest, it was very short-lived because for the next several months, they would all have to relive the hell that Shanda endured over and over again during the investigation and trials of the 4 girls who were responsible for Shanda's murder. The trouble that the investigators had to face wasn't proving who had murdered Shanda and why. That, as we know, was very upfront. The trouble they had was figuring out how involved Toni and Hope had been with Shanda's murder. It took the police a lot longer to arrest Hope and Toni than it did for them to arrest Melinda and Lori. It was their job to prove how involved each person was for this crime. Once Lori's car had been searched, it was incredibly clear that Shanda had been held prisoner in that trunk for hours. The bloodstains and blanket fibers that Shanda had been wrapped in was enough evidence to prove this. Amanda was called in for an interview with the investigators, and she had told the police that Melinda had been jealous of Shanda, of her looks and kind personality, but she also denied having a romantic relationship with either one of them, probably due to the fact that she wasn't out yet with her parents. The police knew that this was a load of bullshit. They had already gotten their hands on several of the letters between Amanda, Melinda, and Shanda, so overall it was a very dumb thing to even lie about. Amanda had also told the police that she believed Lori had been the person who really killed Shanda and didn't think that any of the other girls had been involved other than the fact that they were all there as witnesses. The interviewer sensed immediately that Amanda was attempting to protect Melinda. Maybe because, in a way, Amanda was still very loyal to Melinda, as she was a girl that Amanda had once claimed to have loved. Amanda was of little to no help whatsoever whenever they interviewed her. Several other friends of Melinda and Lori were also interviewed in order for the police to understand the way Melinda and Lori would act on a regular basis. The friends of Lori had a lot to say about her. They would tell the police all of the stories about her fascination with the occult, the rituals, the seances that she would perform and participate in. They talked about her claim of having a vampire entity possessing her, named Deanna the Vampire. They talked about the self-harm she would inflict on herself and how she would drink her own blood or paint pictures with her blood. The friends of Melinda would call her out and tell the cops how she would constantly talk about wanting to murder Shanda for stealing her girlfriend Amanda. An investigator asked one friend how often Melinda would talk about killing Shanda, and this friend responded with almost every day. About a month after Shanda's murder goes by, Tony and Hope had still not yet been arrested. They were pretty much flying way under the radar. They weren't going to school. They stayed at home all day, every day, and claimed that they were scared of potential retribution from Melinda and Lori to the point where they couldn't sleep at night without waking up screaming in terror. So they feared for their own lives, even though Melinda and Lori were already arrested. The DA was also trying to decide if Melinda and Lori would be facing the death penalty. In the state of Indiana at this time in 1992, the minimum age a person could be to face the death penalty was 16 years old. Both Melinda and Lori were at or slightly above this minimum age. But the conviction of minor killers has always been a controversial topic of discussion. I'm sure all of you guys have your own opinions as I do. It was difficult for the majority of the people involved in this case to go through with putting the death penalty on the table. As a human being with empathy, I understand why this is controversial, but the torture and the brutality of Shanda's murder is so heinous that, in my opinion, Melinda and Lori most definitely deserve to have the death penalty on the table for both of them. I don't care how old they were. They were old enough to understand that what they were doing to Shanda was not only wrong, but inhumane. For me, everything is a case-by-case basis, since every case is different, and knowing everything that they put that 12-year-old girl through in her last hours of life, their age for me is completely irrelevant. Investigators spent a lot of time interviewing Melinda and Lori in the meantime about the involvement of Hope and Tony, and there was no loyalty whatsoever between any of these girls. Both Melinda and Lori made it clear that Hope and Tony had participated in the events of Shanda's murder. They both agreed that Hope at points of the night had been more involved than Tony, and Melinda was definitely clear on the fact that Hope had been the first person to pour gasoline on Shanda before Lori lit the match to set her on fire. Melinda and Lori clearly did not appreciate both Hope and Tony downplaying their involvement to little to none. Finally, on March 15, 1992, Hope and Tony were arrested. Both girls were charged with murder, arson, battery with a deadly weapon, aggravated battery, criminal confinement, and intimidation. The same charges Melinda and Lori had been arrested for initially. But on the same afternoon, Melinda and Lori were brought in before the judge and had several new charges added, including child molestation and criminal deviant conduct. Due to her having the least amount of blood on her hands, Tony was offered a plea deal. Prosecutor Guy Townsend was willing to drop all other charges against Tony besides criminal confinement if she agreed to plead guilty and to testify against the other three girls. Tony jumped at this plea deal and accepted these terms on April 22, 1992. Despite all three girls, Melinda, Lori, and Hope, knowing Tony was now going to testify against them in court, they all apparently were not afraid of this and continuously turned down all of the plea deals that they were given. On July 13, 1992, Prosecutor Townsend officially filed to seek the death penalty for both Melinda and Lori, and added conspiracy to commit murder to their list of charges. Townsend wanted these girls to plea out and to take the deals he had offered to them. Him seeking the death penalty was his way to try to motivate them to just take a plea deal. On August 17, 1992, Tony would attempt to take her own life in her cell. She had been stockpiling her daily antidepressant pill she had been receiving for weeks and attempted to overdose with these pills. She was transported to an intensive care unit and she remained comatose for 11 days, but eventually she made a full recovery. A few weeks later, on September 21st, 1992, Melinda and Lori were given the option of yet another plea deal. If they both pled guilty to the murder and torture of Shanda Sharer and to the arson and criminal confinement, then all other charges would be dropped and the death penalty would also be dropped from the table. If they accepted this agreement and cooperated with the state, then their sentences would run concurrently, which means the amount of time they will serve for their crimes would occur all at once instead of one after the other. Both Melinda and Lori accepted these terms, which if they didn't, then they would have been complete idiots. And or they would have needed to hire new lawyers, because after everything these two had done to Shanda, this is a very generous deal that they had been offered. Apparently, Melinda was having a good old time while at the Clark County Jail. About 8 days after she accepted the plea deal, she was caught having sex with one of the employees. After this incident, she was transferred to the Indiana Women's Prison. The employee resigned from their job, and there were no charges filed for the incident, despite Melinda still being 16 years old at this time. In December of 1992, Lori gave an exclusive interview on a Cincinnati television station to a reporter by the name of Chris Yao. During this interview, Lori would claim how she had been manipulated by Melinda and how she had tried to protect Shanda during the night of her murder. She went on and on about how Melinda went crazy and beat Shanda until ultimately killing her, and how there was nothing she could have done to stop it. Lori wanted to have a pity party. The "oh, poor little old me, there was nothing I could have done to save her." And of course, no one bought this story. Anyone with a single brain cell knew what a load of shit her story and claims were. On December 14th, 1992, Melinda's sentence hearing began. Prosecutor Townsend gave the graphic details of the night of Shanda's torture and murder. Crime scene photos were shown during the hearing. Lori, Hope, Tony, Amanda, along with several of Melinda's friends, testified against her. Lori attempted to push as much blame onto Melinda as possible, while also trying to make herself appear once again as a manipulated young girl who didn't know what she could have done to stop the insanity that had come over Melinda. Investigators of the case were also brought in to testify, and several members of Shanda's family also took the stand. Shanda's mother, Jackie, provided her own testimony for her daughter, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking. She ended her testimony by saying, quote, "The proper punishment for Melinda would be to place her in a cell with pictures of Shanda's burned body and force her to continually listen to a tape of my daughter screaming like she did that night," close quote. She then looked directly at Melinda and stated, quote, "I hope and pray you remember these words for the rest of your life. May you rot in hell," close quote. I couldn't agree with Jackie more. Shanda was just a little girl. Her entire family was robbed of her life, and to have to wake up every day with knowing every gruesome and horrific detail of what happened to her, I couldn't imagine it. Shanda's family had to sit and listen to the awful details of her murder multiple times for days while these sentencing hearings occurred. Melinda would sob and cry throughout several testimonies. But of course, these tears weren't for what she had done to Shanda. In my opinion, they were tears of self-preservation. Shanda's 19-year-old sister, Paige, had also provided testimony. She was 7 months pregnant at the time with her first child. During her testimony, she stared directly at Melinda and stated, quote, "They sit and cry, but they didn't cry when they were doing it to her. Why should they cry now? Because they are in trouble. My sister doesn't have a chance to cry. She didn't have a chance at anything. She didn't have a choice but to die," end quote. Part of Melinda's ultimate defense was to bring up the abuse that occurred by the hands of her father, Larry. They argued that Melinda's lifetime of abuse had contributed to her developing borderline personality disorder. But at the end of the day, the borderline personality disorder defense is a pathetic one, because so many people on this planet suffer from borderline personality disorder, and the vast majority of these people with this legitimate diagnosis do not end up kidnapping a 12-year-old, torture her for hours, and finish them off by setting them on fire. On December 28, 1992, Lori had her sentencing hearing. Townsend again described the horrific events that had unfolded on the night of January 10th and morning hours of January 11th, 1992. The defense attempted to depict Lori as this lost girl who had never been accepted by anyone, including her parents, that she had faced ridicule and bullying for being different and was desperate to be accepted and would do anything to gain this acceptance. Boo fucking who. It was more or less about the same as Melinda's hearing, in all honesty. and by the end, the defense failed, as no one had felt any empathy or sympathy for Melinda and Lori. On January 4th, 1993, Melinda and Lori took turns standing before Judge Ted Todd, and he sentenced them both to the maximum sentence of 60 years in prison, but they would be eligible for parole after 30. Melinda cried when she heard her sentence, while Lori was stone cold and didn't even flinch when her sentence was read out to her. Within days after being sentenced, Shanda's parents were informed that both Melinda and Lori were attempting to sell their stories to television and movie producers, which of course enraged the entire family. They immediately filed a $1 billion lawsuit against all 4 of the girls to prevent any form of monetary gain at Shanda's expense. On January 19, 1993, Toni's sentencing hearing began. She was praised for her overall cooperation, and she also had several friends and family members testify on her behalf. Before her sentencing, Toni made an apology to Shanda's family for being one of the 4 girls from the night of her murder. But within the same breath, she expressed how she had been too scared of Melinda and Lori to do anything, as she feared that they would kill her as well, and how it was punishment enough that she had nightmares of Shanda's screams and seeing her body burning at night. No, that's not enough punishment. She had not 1, not 2, but at least 3 different opportunities during that night to get help for Shanda. She chose to let her die. I don't care if she was scared for her life. She had the time to talk to her friend on the phone without any of the other girls near her. She could have told this friend, or better yet, she could have made a quick call to the police and give them Lori's license plate number and could have saved Shanda's life. Judge Todd sentenced Toni to 20 years in prison. Toni also broke down crying as her sentence was read. Hope eventually would plead guilty as well, and her sentence hearing began on June 1st, 1993. Her defense team had requested her hearing to be moved to South Bend, Indiana, with Judge Jean Jordan proceeding. Obviously, Hope's defense team were hoping that having a different judge may give Hope a more lenient sentence than Judge Todd would have given her. During Hope's hearing, the defense attempted to portray Hope as a follower who was dominated by both Melinda and Lori. They hired a psychologist to sit up there and explain how immature Hope is and how she wanted to avoid any type of confrontation at all costs. But at the end, Judge Jordan was not more sympathetic to Hope, and she was also sentenced to the maximum of 60 years in prison, but with 10 years suspended for mitigating circumstances, and ordered Hope to be placed on probation for 10 years at the time of her release. So here is where my blood pressure spikes, and I'm sure the majority of all of you watching are going to get furious. Where are Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Toni now? Toni, while incarcerated, had received her GED and associate's degree by the year of 1998. On December 14, 2000, she was released on parole at the age of 24 years old, after only serving 9 years of her 20-year sentence. She moved back to Madison and remained on parole until late 2002. It has been reported that she is now living a happy life in Madison, keeping a low profile, living under a different name, and has 2 children of her own. Hope received her GED and bachelor's degree during incarceration. She was released on parole in 2006 at the age of 29 years old after serving 14 years. Hope had done everything in her power to reduce her sentence. She took classes, she made several appeals. She became a model prisoner to the point where 5 years were shaved off of her sentence for good behavior, which I find as absolute bullshit. Hope remained on supervised parole until 2011. Shanda's mother, Jackie, has been very vocal about her opinion on the injustice of Hope's release from prison. In May of 2011, Jackie and Paige made an appearance on the Dr. Phil show in a 2-part episode confronting Hope and Amanda on their part of Shanda's murder. I've watched both episodes as part of my research on Shanda's case, and I was revolted by both Hope and Amanda. During Hope's confrontation, all Jackie and Paige wanted was an actual answer as to why Hope had participated in the murder of Shanda, but she could not articulate a reason as to why. She kept repeating, I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. Then she revealed why her mugshot is of her smiling, as if she won a first place ribbon for a contest. She explained that the officers that were taking her mugshot were joking about how young Hope was, and they were comforting Hope and made her laugh to make her feel better. since according to Hope, she was crying and upset at the situation she was in. Which, if you ask me, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the officers be trying to make her laugh while taking her mugshot photo at the same time? But whatever you say, Hope. Here's a direct quote from Hope and how she feels about her being released from prison. Quote, "I was sentenced for punishment, and I was sentenced for rehabilitation. And I do feel like the rehabilitation took place. It doesn't matter if I'm in prison or out of prison. Absolutely nothing could ever fulfill the punishment part of for what I did." End quote. It does. It does matter whether you are or you are not in prison. She helped kill a 12-year-old girl and poured gasoline on her. These girls ruined the lives of an entire family. It matters. Jackie and Paige go on to explain how much Shanda's death affects them. Jackie has talked about checking herself into different mental institutions and how she's had various thoughts of committing suicide. Paige talked about how for years she wasn't able to sleep, and if she did manage to fall asleep, she would have nightmares of Shanda's murder. Stephen Scherer, Shanda's father, had passed away in 2005. He was so overwhelmed by the guilt of his daughter's murder. It was never released what his official cause of death was, but Jackie and Paige had insinuated that he had passed away from his alcohol abuse. That started shortly after Shanda's murder. He was so heartbroken, and he never stopped blaming himself for Shanda being taken that night. The only light about any of this is that Stephen is now laid to rest next to his daughter. Amanda also displayed a lack of empathy. And if she was trying to depict herself as a victim who also lost Shanda, someone she claimed to have loved, she did an awful job. Amanda took zero accountability in her part in Shanda's murder case. And yes, we can sit here and argue all day long how Amanda had not been one of the 4 girls involved with the actual killing of Shanda. But at the very least, I think we can all agree that if Shanda had not met Amanda and developed this relationship with her, then she would still be alive today. But Amanda blatantly said that she had no guilt and was pretty much only there on the Dr. Phil show to defend herself against Jackie and Paige's claims that she was a child predator and had taken advantage of Shanda. Amanda insisted that Shanda was the one who made the first move on her, and also went on to say how she lost a lot when Shanda had been murdered, such as losing her basketball scholarship, as if a scholarship was more important than Shanda's life. I wanted to have sympathy for Amanda, I really did, but after that selfish appearance on Dr. Phil, that flew out the window for me. The way Amanda acted was atrocious. She was unapologetic and was beyond disrespectful to Shanda's family. And when Dr. Phil pointed out how disrespectful she was being, she gave the most childish response and said, "Well, they've been disrespecting me." Amanda clearly has no sense of empathy, and it was just infuriating every time she spoke. I will leave a link in the description of clips of the Dr. Phil show if you want to see for yourself. Moving on to Lori. While incarcerated, Lori, who grew up despising religion to the point of being obsessed with the occult, suddenly had a change of heart and embraced God for the first time in her entire life. She would later give an interview claiming once she let God into her heart, she was able to feel guilty for what she had done to Shanda, and she accepted the consequences of her crimes. On January 11th, 2018, which coincidentally was the 26th anniversary of Shanda's murder, Lori was released from prison at the age of 43 years old, which, if you ask me, is a slap in the face to Shanda and her family. Just the fact that she was released at all is, but letting her out on the anniversary, that's a whole new level of disrespect. Lori remained on parole for just 1 more year, and by late 2019, she was a fully free woman. Not much is known about Lori's current life since her release, as she has kept a very low profile. All we really know is that she still lives somewhere in Indiana. Both Lori and Melinda's attorneys did everything possible to have their clients released from prison as early as possible. In October of 2007, Melinda's attorney announced that she was seeking early release, claiming at the time that she had received insufficient legal representation. Her attorney claimed that Melinda only pled guilty to avoid the death penalty, which by the time in 1992, when this case took place, was in the process of changing the minimum age from 16 to 18 years old. He stated that Melinda was in no real danger of getting the death penalty, and this was not made clear by her legal representation at that time. He also went on to say that his client Melinda had served her time and that she is reformed and remorseful after having served just 15 years in prison at this time. Shanda's mother, Jackie, again, was extremely vocal on her opinion and pleaded for Melinda to remain behind bars. A petition was then started to keep Melinda incarcerated for the remainder of her 60-year sentence. And by December 2nd, 2007, this petition received nearly 7,000 signatures. But at the end, this petition and the pleas of Shanda's family weren't enough. And on September 5th, 2019, after serving 27 years in prison, Melinda was released at the age of 43 years old. She has also reported to have changed her name and keeps a very low profile, just like the other three. While serving her sentence, Melinda had began training service dogs for people with disabilities, and she actually became a really impressive dog trainer. A breeder who would give Melinda dogs to train reached out to Jackie and actually gave her a video of Melinda training these dogs. At first, Jackie refused to watch these videos. She still did not want anything to do with any of the girls who had murdered her daughter. But the breeder convinced her to watch it, and Jackie was so moved by Melinda's transformation. For years, she had described Melinda as evil and with no soul. And watching this video of her training these dogs, Jackie was surprised and described Melinda as someone who had been reborn. Jackie did something so inspiring in my opinion. She donated a puppy for Melinda to train. The puppy was named Angel in honor of Shanda. Jackie, despite having every reason to hate Melinda and the rest of the girls forever, gave her this opportunity to do something good. And I have nothing but respect for Jackie. I don't have a clue why so many people want to give Jackie backlash and criticism for doing this. Shanda was her daughter, and if she wants to donate 1 million puppies for Melinda to train, then she has every right to do so. Does Melinda training these service dogs make up for what was done to Shanda? Do any of the girls deserve to be walking free, living their best life, getting married, having kids, while Shanda didn't even get to celebrate her 13th birthday? Nothing they do will ever bring Shanda back into the arms of her family. Whatever her family needs to do to be able to get up in the morning and live their lives and make Shanda proud shouldn't be anyone else's goddamn business. Because unless you are a part of that family, then you do not and will never understand how it felt to lose Shanda. For society's sake, I hope Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Tony have changed. I, for one, could never trust any of them ever again. They all participated in a horrendous murder. My biggest fear regarding convicted murderers who are released from prison is the potential that they could kill someone else. Knowing what happened to Shanda, how easy it was for these 4 people to participate in the torture and murder of this child, or sit there and do nothing while she was being tortured, who's to honestly say with 100% certainty that they would not commit murder ever again? It scares the hell out of me. So many convicted felons are released back into society as free men and women, people who have done unspeakable things to others. They are out there, free, without any type of supervision. Now, is it possible for a person to be reformed even after murdering someone? Of course, but do they deserve to be free after what they have done? I don't have the answers. I have my opinions. Doesn't mean they are right. If it had been up to me, none of them would have ever been released from prison. Tony is the only one that might have had a slight chance of leniency from me, but the other 3, hell no. I might get a ton of hate for my opinions. Maybe some of you guys completely disagree, and that's fine. But the fact is that Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Tony are free. They've served their time, and they are now able to live normal lives. But Shanda will never get to live her life. She never got to grow up. Her family never got the chance to watch her become the incredible, loving woman everyone in her life knew she would have become. Shanda wanted to grow up. She clearly wanted to live, based on how long she survived that torturous night. But 4 girls took Shanda's life away. They took everything from her. She endured approximately 10 full hours of torture and pain and terror, and I don't believe there was ever a moment during those 10 hours where she ever gave up her will to live. But that is everything I have on Shanda Scher's case. For those of you who have stayed for this video's entirety, thank you so much. I hope every case I cover reaches into your heart in some way, shape, or form. I know they hit mine. Comment down below your thoughts about Shanda's case. Let me know what your opinions are. I read all comments and I would love to see your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I will be back with another video covering another case soon. But until then, bye guys.